Once we thought whales were sea monsters, fearsome creatures against which we'd pit our strength. Today we're beginning to realize that when whales are not terrorized by human hunting, they're curious and even friendly toward us. Gray whales travel along the coast of California each winter and spring, sometimes only 100 yards from the shoreline. We now have the opportunity to create a relationship with whales that will be unique in human history.
When we think of whales, we normally think of animals living in the depths of the oceans. Actually, most whales maintain a close relationship to coastal waters, and none more so than the California gray whale. It's not unusual to see them just offshore, sometimes inside the breakers. This can be seen all along the west coast of the United States and Mexico. The California gray whale is the oldest of the whale species, a member of its own taxonomic family. The other whales are divided into two groups: the rorquals, with the pleated throat that allows them to ingest huge quantities of small prey, and the odontocetes, large-toothed animals like the sperm whale. Gray whales feed on bottom organisms by sucking mud into their mouths, then expelling it through their baleen. In this way, they filter out small crustaceans and bottom-dwelling amphipods. The gray whale's annual migration from feeding grounds in the Arctic to Baja California and back is the longest known for any mammal on Earth, covering more than 6,000 miles. Gray whales flourish in part because they come together in a specific set of breeding lagoons. But this trait also made it easy for whalers to find them. The whaler's tactic was to harpoon a newborn calf and wait until the mother would come to its aid. Then they would harpoon her. Despite their fighting qualities, gray whales were hunted to the brink of extinction. By the 1930s, there were so few gray whales that many experts thought they would become extinct. In fact, they did become extinct in large parts of their range. Atlantic gray whales were entirely wiped out by Yankee whalers during the 17 and 1800s. Pacific gray whales once spread out from their Arctic feeding ground into two populations. One went down the coast of Siberia and Asia. The combination of Yankee whalers and modern industrial whaling has wiped these animals out. When gray whales were protected along the west coast of North America, a few survivors still remained, and they were enough to rebuild the population. Today, gray whales are thought to number some 18,000, roughly their pre-whaling population. Film producers Hardy Jones and Julia Whitty have documented the lives of gray whales for more than 10 years.
The best place in the world to film gray whales is in the breeding lagoons of the Baja. The southernmost of these lagoons is Magdalena Bay. The protected area is created by a series of barrier islands. Gray whales gather at the entrances to the lagoons, and I've seen 50 of them in a matter of just a few minutes. They enter the bays through openings like the Boca de Soledad, where we often see them rolling in the surf line. Or flinging themselves into breaches just offshore. For many of the gray whales, this socializing is a prelude to mating. This area, between the barrier islands and the mainland, is a world unto itself, a truly wild place. And Mexico's trying to keep it that way. The government has initiated a monitoring program to make sure the whales are not harassed in the breeding lagoons. Here, the gray whales share their world with a profusion of bird life, including cormorants, Brandt's geese, white pelicans, and brown pelicans. The lagoons are fringed with mangroves, which provide breeding areas for a wide variety of fish. Attempts have been made periodically to develop these lagoons for mineral extraction, but so far the only industries here are fishing and tourism. It always amazes me to remember that to get to these lagoons, gray whales must swim more than 6,000 miles. That means swimming 20 hours a day at more than 3 miles per hour for 3 months. Pregnant females reach the lagoons first, followed by mature males, and then immature members of both sexes. It's very difficult to tell the sex of a whale when looking at it from the surface, but female grays are larger than males. They can measure up to 50 feet in length. We've never actually seen the birth of a whale. They go way up into the estuaries to do it, and going into these areas is discouraged by Mexican authorities, and rightly so. When gray whale calves are first born, they measure about 16 feet. They have wrinkled faces, and they nurse by diving underwater and suckling from their mother's side. These young gray whales remain in constant contact with their mother for many months, or even years. Once their calves are born, the mothers lead them into an area of Mag Bay called La Florida. And that is where tourists congregate, hoping to touch a whale. Tourist vessels anchor here and transfer visitors to small boats. Sometimes the young whales do come within touching distance. But more often, their mothers lead them away. But for some tourists, their trip isn't successful unless they touch a whale. So the boat handlers often pursue the mother and calf, hoping to get close enough for that coveted touch. Because there are so many tourist boats and so few mother-calf pairs, this can result in harassment of the whales. Several boats will gang up on the whales at once, so that even if one leaves, other boats continue to chase. This can interrupt rest and feeding. Recently, the Mexican government tightened restrictions on tourist entry into several of the breeding areas, and is now considering tighter controls specifically on La Florida. But for whatever reason, Mag Bay doesn't have many friendly whales. The place where this behavior started, and is fairly common, is San Ignacio Lagoon, several hundred miles north of here. My first encounter with a gray whale there was extraordinarily close. San Ignacio is the home of the so-called friendly whales. They're so curious they swim right up to your boat, sometimes several at a time. This behavior started during the middle 1970s and has been growing ever since. You can't help but be impressed by how gentle these huge animals are. If they didn't take into account our fragility, they could kill us just by being friendly. All you need to understand how careful they are is to see them fling their body weight of more than 40 tons into a breach. These friendly and curious animals are the creatures the whalers called devilfish. What an incredible thing to learn that when they aren't hunted or harassed, they're curious and even friendly toward us. I've found it's the natural state of many animals to be curious, and this is why I object to hunting, because it terrorizes them and makes this kind of relationship impossible. Maybe the friendliest of all the whales is one called Bumper. One afternoon, Julia and I were filming in an inflatable. As divers Howard Hall and Marty Snyderman were preparing to get into the water, a juvenile gray whale came over to the boat and began investigating the propeller. Then it came up and nudged the inflatable. Howard and Marty were caught between friendliness for the whale and the growing apprehension that something unusual was happening. Bumper settled just under their inflatable. Then he'd bump the inflatable boat, then take a look to see what had happened. Then he'd try it again. I watched as Howard slipped into the water with his camera. He's one of the most fearless people I've ever met, but he was back over the side of the inflatable unusually quickly. Bumper obviously didn't mean any harm. He was just having fun with us. But whales like Bumper are unusual. Mostly, the friendly whales put their heads near the inflatable and seem to enjoy being touched by people. Some authorities object to our calling these friendly whales. I don't care what you call them, but it seems to me obvious that what they're displaying is a gentle curiosity, and that is a sign of intelligence and benevolence.
One of the best ways to see whales is from the air. At water level, most of the animal is underwater, and for divers, murky water often restricts visibility. But from the air, they can be seen in their social groupings and at play. And one of their favorite forms of play is body surfing.
We were in Magdalena Bay when we heard there were large groups of grays at one of the entrances to the lagoons. I radioed La Paz for a plane to meet me on one of the sand spits. Over the years, I've heard pilots say they've seen whales surfing out at sea. I'd always wanted to see it myself. And there they were, huge bodies lined up to the incoming waves. What an astonishing thing to see these whales, resting and playing, courting and just scratching their backs on the sand. And to think, we almost wiped these whales off the face of the earth.
During March, the mothers lead their young calves out of the lagoons and north toward the Bering Sea. Throughout the spring, the long parade of gray whales continues along the west coast of North America. At certain points, it's common to see pairs of grays traveling just outside the surf line. Promontories like Point Reyes in California attract thousands of visitors each year to witness the grand procession. As they travel, the mothers are always on the outside to protect the juvenile from the dangers of the ocean. And the dangers are very real.
The waters off San Francisco are home to perhaps the greatest concentration of great white sharks in the world. And it's not uncommon to see the results of their attacks on the bodies of even mature gray whales.
There are killer whales all along the coast of North America, particularly off the coasts of Washington, British Columbia, and Alaska. Killer whales hunt in packs, making protection of the youngster difficult. Dealing with such predators is part of nature's scheme. But modern man is introducing threats that are anything but natural. This whale washed ashore near San Francisco, drowned in a fishing net. It probably carried the net and its anchors around for a week or more before running out of strength and drowning. Another hazard along their northern migration is whale watchers. Some of these boats are a problem for gray whales, following them too closely and forcing them to change course again and again to escape harassment. And perhaps the deadliest threat of all, toxic pollutants that we're putting into the sea in increasing quantities. Several gray whales have washed ashore in Puget Sound in the state of Washington and near Vancouver, Canada. Some environmentalists think that they are dying after ingesting toxic materials. Robert Taylor of Greenpeace.
And this whale had somewhere in the inland regions been feeding on extremely toxic matter, extremely toxic material. In fact, there were 3 or 4 different toxic pollutants there which were in the high range. So we had indications that this whale had probably died of some form of toxic poisoning.
But most of the whales do survive. By summer, they're in the rich waters off western Canada and as far north as the Barents Sea off northern Alaska. They spend the summer feeding there, storing energy before moving south again. When 3 gray whales waited too long to leave, they became trapped in the ice. The world's attention was riveted on a patch of water near Barrow, Alaska, after Eskimos found the whales struggling for air, their breathing hole becoming smaller each day. To keep the breathing space open, the Eskimos chopped holes in the ice. The Alaska National Guard and the oil companies combined forces in an effort to open a trail to the sea. As the whales fought for their lives, the world held its breath. Despite all these efforts, one of the whales, the smallest, failed to surface one morning and was presumed lost. But still, Eskimos worked, struggling against the oncoming winter to save the remaining pair. Then came the most dramatic breakthrough of all, glasnost. The Russian word for openness took on a whole new meaning when a Soviet icebreaker volunteered to open a way to the sea. The 2 gray whales were last seen moving through the path cut by the icebreaker, headed south to resume their long migration. As they swam to freedom, the world cheered. The gray whales had shown their stuff again.
Gray whales have made a remarkable recovery and even seem to be colonizing new territory. We commonly see them around the tip of the Baja Peninsula, and we've even found them far up in the Sea of Cortez.
As a species, the gray whales have shown they can survive the worst that nature can throw against them. They've twice returned from the brink of extinction. Now, it's up to us to make sure that we human beings don't once again tip the scales against them.
What does it tell us about the world that whales are curious and friendly? Perhaps it's that the animal kingdom is far more complex than we've been led to believe. And maybe it tells us there are relationships out there that we've only begun to explore. We don't have to wait to find intelligent aliens in space. They're already here. swimming just offshore. I'm Ted Danson. Thank you for joining us.